Hey everybody, what's happening? My name is Jeremy Lord and welcome to another Adobe Live episode. Today is part three of our four-part series, so we're almost there. And as you can see from my screen, I've got a little illustration based on just kind of the basics of digital art, right? So how we kind of go from inspiration to reference to sketch to inking. And today we're going to talk a little bit about color. So in the past few kind of episodes, what we've looked at is to kind of look at doing using a reference pose to create a sketch and then kind of tweaking that to then kind of have this basic idea or kind of building blocks and then adding some inking on that, which is what we ended up on last week. So what we can kind of start thinking about today is obviously bringing some life to this and bringing some color. Now, color is a really big one. A lot of people, I get a lot of questions on color, get a lot of kind of like, how do you pick them? How do you choose them? There's not really a kind of straight answer that I can give. There is some theory that I'll share with you guys today, but there isn't really, as with all things, I think, creative, especially kind of visual creative, there isn't really a thing of like, here, you do this every time, you'll get this result. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. It really depends on what the piece is for, and how those kind of colors interact together. But there are a couple of ways to kind of start this. So one of the main things that I like to work with after I've kind of gotten some inspiration, and as we kind of spoke about in the previous episodes, what I'm going for on this particular stream is going to be kind of like a Dragon Ball Goku inspired character, right? So we're going to start with those colors. Now, the colors on Goku are a little bit tricky because we've got orange and blue. They're complementary colors, so they're opposite ends of the spectrum, which means that you get a high contrast, but putting in other colors with that can be a little bit tricky. So we're going to kind of loosely inspire from that rather than kind of stick to exactly trying to do that. And what I like to do whenever I'm kind of creating a piece is to kind of create these swatches. So these are swatches based on kind of 6 different colors that I will create whenever I've like done a piece, or like even after the fact, I'll create these, and then I can kind of use them and tweak them for future reference. And so the one I'm going to be using today is going to be this one down here, right? So this guy down here is going to be the one that I'm going to be using. And again, I'm not going to necessarily stick to this in a very kind of, strict way. This is going to be a little bit more kind of fast and loose. And what I've done is I've grabbed some colors from these two, and I've got 2 different color swatches that can happen in here. This one up here is probably, is probably a little bit more on the actual kind of Goku side of things, a little bit more realistic. And the one below is just a little bit brighter. It's got a little bit more contrast. So we're going to work with those. And then how I kind of use these, if you want, is there's this kind of rule in color called the 60-30-10 rule. So 60% one color, 30% a slightly different color, and then 10% a completely different color to kind of create this contrast. And so what that means is, you've probably heard this if you have done any kind of interior design or any kind of like color theory like this, is you get an overall kind of feel. Let's say in this particular instance, the overwhelming color for Goku is orange. So I've got 60% of my image here is going to be these kind of warm yellows, orange, and reds. That's going to be my 60. Then my kind of 30% is going to be these 2 kind of blues. And then I've got a little kind of highlight. Now, again, we're going to add colors on top of this. This is just a starting point, right? Because when you're starting with color, it can be a little bit overwhelming. What do I put down first? But having this kind of 60-30-10 rule just means that you're going to get a good amount of contrast, a good amount of value, and your image is going to work a little bit better. So let's get stuck straight into this. So I've got my outline layer here. And what I will do is I will create a group underneath that and call that my shorthand. As you can see, for outlines is OTL. My shorthand for colors is COLS. And then I'll just add in a layer underneath that. And that is going to be my base layer. So again, this is just how I like to work here. You don't necessarily need to do the same. And I'm going to go ahead and select my orange here. Now, before I do this, a little trick that you can do is take this background, and because it's white, it's going to make it a little bit trickier to maybe see the colors. Excuse me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this down to like a 50%-ish gray, maybe something a little bit lighter than that. Just again, so we can kind of work to a color that already exists and kind of get to that. So I drop my orange here, and I am actually going to go ahead and select and create basically just kind of entire drawing here is going to be filled with my flat colors. This is my base color that I'm going to be working with, and it's going to be the main kind of thing that's going to allow me to do a few different things later on. So you'll notice as well that I'm going to be doing something with a layer mask, and this is the whole point. You don't have to do this, but I just find it's a good way to kind of do this going forward, and it'll make sense in a minute. So I've made my selection. I'm going to hit Option Delete, and it's going to fill with that color. I can go into here because I obviously don't want color in there, and delete that. There we go. So I can do this with the lasso tool, or I can do this a little bit easier with the brush. So I've just got my standard brush up here, just my round kind of like painting inking brush. That's quite easy to use. And what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of going around the inside of the outline and creating myself a bit more of a kind of a leeway to get to where I'm going. Right? And you can see here that I've overlapped in some places, like just here, there's a little thing. Normally I would definitely clean these up, but we're kind of going a little bit faster here. So I'm not going to worry too much about those, but ideally, you'd probably want to have those be a little bit cleaner. But yeah, just trying to get to this result as fast as we actually can. Flynn Tracy says, hello. Hey, Flynn. How's it going? If you guys have any questions, by the way, obviously don't hesitate to pop them in the chat. I'll get to them in due course. Any questions about any of the kind of the keystrokes that I'm inputting or why I'm doing a specific thing, always love to kind of talk and draw at the same time. That's kind of the whole point of these streams. But yeah, this is basically just me now until this is all done, and I will do some quick fixes in here on the more dramatic mistakes that I'm making. And so the reason I've done that quickly as opposed to the lasso tool is I can now make a selection with the lasso tool, and I just have a little bit more kind of margin for error on that line. So it's just an extra little kind of buffer area. You could ask as well, why don't I just go in and paint the whole thing? The main reason here is probably because it takes a little bit longer to do so, to like paint everything in. But also you miss potentially a few little kind of scarix here and there. It's not a nice kind of clean, flat outline. And as you can see, I can't resist a little bit of OCD and cleaning this artwork up. But yeah, I just going in with that and then using a lasso tool, I find is a little bit kind of speedier. It depends also, if I'm working for something that's a little bit fun for myself, if it's like a personal project and there's no deadline, then painting it in can be a little bit more fun. Like it actually feels a little bit more like I'm kind of doing the drawing process. Whereas if I'm kind of on a deadline for a client, I'll probably do this and then do the lasso tool and fill it in. It's faster, it's easier, and I don't have to kind of spend as much time. But it is a little bit less kind of fun because it's not as kind of paint feeling, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like you're kind of drawing the thing as much, if you know what I mean. So yeah. So important to get all of this down. It can be a little bit laborious to do this, and I'm doing this in a rush, but what this will mean is doing all this work now means I don't have to do it again later on, right? So do the work once, do all this kind of like selection work once, and then you can use that information and give it to Photoshop to not ever have to do it again. Flynn's asking me, do you have any kind of decide the colors that you're going to use at the start? Kind of yes, kind of no, as always. Not necessarily kind of super like absolutely hard and fast rule of like, yes, you always need to do this. No, you never need to do this. I like to have a bit of an idea of what colors I'm putting in. And in this case, that is just our reference material of like, all right, we're doing something that looks like Goku, that's referencing that. So obviously we need to kind of reference those colors. If I'm working on a professional brief, generally speaking, those colors will also be dictated by the brief itself. So by the brand or the product that I'm working on will have a set amount of colors. So, you know, you're probably going to be required to use those. So that kind of is imposed on you. But for personal work, I think it's a good idea to have a kind of a direction, a general direction before you start in terms of like, I'm going to do a kind of like cold nighttime piece or a warm sunset piece, or I'm going to do something that's going to use a lot of complementary colors and is going to look a little bit kind of vapor wavy or any of those kinds of things. It just means that you got somewhere to start, and it means you're not kind of staring at a blank canvas going like, I don't know where to begin with what color, because there's infinite color combinations on something like this where you can change, like, what if the shoes were this color, and what if the hair was another color, and what if I just changed the shoelaces to this but kept the hair and the shoes that do, like, you can just go on forever and kind of get nowhere if you don't have a little bit of a direction. But in saying that, that's not necessarily going to be, you know, something that you need to stick to from the onset. So we've got the base color here. We've filled in every single thing that needs to be filled in, done this as kind of cleanly as fast as possible. How I'm going to use this going forward is there's a good chance this layer will actually not be visible at all in the end result. The only reason I'm doing this is to kind of identify what needs to be filled and what not. But also I'm going to now use this as a layer mask so that all my further layers that I'm going to do don't need to be as detailed. So this is what I was talking about, where it's like, I've done this once, I don't need to do it again. Whereas like if I'm painting the hair, which you'll see in a sec, I don't need to kind of be careful a second time around or a third time around as many times as I'm kind of doing a layer. So what I will do is I will press Command or Control on the layer thumbnail, and what you can see is I get this little kind of dashed line, and that's going to select every kind of filled pixel in that layer. And then I'm going to go to my group, which is why these are in a group. So they're kind of going to neatly stack, and I can do a thing to all of them at the same time. And I'm going to put a layer mask on that group from the selection that I just made. So visually now, nothing's happening, right? It hasn't changed anything because it's not masking any information, because it's just done it from the orange color that I've done. But what's going to be really handy now is if I, let me go in and kind of do a hair layer here, and I'm going to go for like this bluish color for the hair. Let me turn that off real quick. So turning it on and off is just shift click on the actual layer thumbnail and it will turn it off. But let's say that now I want to paint in the hair. I can literally just kind of go nuts and do this. And I don't have to be careful, at least on the outside of the outline, right? I don't need to take care and just do what I was doing before. Sorry, zooming in and out. Zooming in and like kind of doing this careful of not kind of going outside the lines like this and working that way. Because if I turn that layer mask back on, I've got that information already set into Photoshop. So I've done it once, and then that information can be applied to all further layers that I will do. Now that does mean that, that only works for the outside of my work, right? If I'm going on the inside where like the hair goes over the face and I do this, then obviously that will show. So I do need to be careful on areas that are still inside the drawing, but not the actual hair. But it does save a fair amount of time when working this way, because it just means, again, like I said, you don't need to be careful going around the outside of your work. And it also helps a little bit later on kind of working with different layers, as you'll see either this week or next when we get into a little bit more shading and detail work. So now I can just go in and quickly fill that, and I've put my hair on a separate layer. There we go. So again, any layer that I put on top of this will kind of be clipped by that mask. Now there's a second way of doing this that I don't really like doing, but can definitely work. If you don't like working with layer masks and so on, what you can do is you can do a clipping layer as opposed to a clipping mask. And as long as your hair is above that base layer, what you can do is holding down Option, if you hover in between the two layers, like the hair and the base layer, you'll get this little kind of square with a right angle layer. And what that does is it makes it a clipping layer to the bottom layer. So if I have that nice and set, I can do that. I can keep adding and adding and adding, and they'll all go to that orange layer. I don't like doing that, mostly because I don't like how it looks in my layer panel. It confuses me and I don't really dig it. So I do this. But both ways are fine, totally to use. Again, it's just a personal preference for me. No other reason than just like, nah, I'm not doing that. And that's fine. Okay. So let's now go in and kind of start thinking about all the rest of the colors that we're going to be putting into this, and thinking about how we can work in different things and getting a good amount of volume and also clarity in this character. So one of the main things that we need to think about with this is how the character is going to contrast. We've got an interesting pose happening. There's a lot of foreshortening. There's a lot of stuff in front of other stuff. If we're not careful, we can kind of trick the eye and make it kind of not see some of the detail, or kind of blur it in and not have a nice kind of clean silhouette to look at in terms of volumes. So first things first is I need to think about kind of going on the Goku-esque colors, if you will. So I'm going to go and select this purple here, and I'm going to start putting in highlights based on kind of what we're seeing here. So we got a sash around there. We got a shirt underneath the orange kind of suit, and then we got shoulders and things happening. So we're going to kind of go a little bit on that to get that reference in there. So let's start in with the shirt, and I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to go in with details. How many layers you put into your work, again, is up to your workflow, how likely you are to want to make changes and so on. But yeah, I tend to try and err on the side of not too many layers, just because it can get a little bit out of control. If you start making layers every which way, it can be a little bit kind of funky and tricky that way. It also weighs your file down a little bit more. And we've got these kind of weird cyberpunk suspender things just because he's cool. And we're doing a slightly kind of cyberpunk version of Goku. So that's cool. Okay. And let's see what else we can do. I might actually give him kind of like, he's got a bit of a sports jacket on, like a varsity jacket. So I might do the sleeves that purple, because again, in our reference here, like obviously this is sleeveless, but there's a little bit of a sleeve sticking out. So we're going to reference that in here and try and see kind of how that looks in the end. And then back here. Okay, so lots of zooming in and zooming out at this stage. And you can kind of see what that does is it starts to give us a little bit more of a kind of understanding of how the volume works, but it can also create some confusion. So this kind of sleeve in the background here, this arm in the background is looking a little bit kind of funny. Like it's hard to see from this angle. It's like is that a hood? Is it kind of like a weird thing on his back? Like it can be a little bit tricky to see these things sometimes. So that's going to need to be potentially addressed a little bit later on. The other thing that I'm noticing immediately is I need to probably clarify where the shoes kind of go and where the boots go. So let's do that right now. Let's not worry too much about detail at this stage. We're just trying to get a rough kind of look in to see how that works and do this kind of thing. So that already gives us a little bit more kind of information about what's happening. There's still a lot of orange going on. We can't really see where his body is versus where the outfit is. So let's tackle that next. And I'm going to go in, I could take this like skin tone that we've got here, but I'm going to go with something a little bit more kind of unnatural, a little bit more kind of fantastic, because again, like creative license, so why not? And I'm going to do his body kind of this like gold color. And now I'm underneath my hair layer, so I don't need to be too careful of where I'm going, where the hair and the skin meet. There we go. So I can kind of do this and fill that in. And then the hand here. Again, this is where, as you can see, like my layer mask, I'm making all these selections that are going kind of crazy over here and only being careful where the drawing kind of overlaps itself. And that is because of my layer mask. So it really is something that is quite handy to work with. If you do that, it just means a lot of work downstream is kind of already done and you can just keep reusing it. And I've screwed up my selection here in a really weird way. I've tried to do too much at the same time. There we go. And you'll see that, yeah, like immediately now, again, we like keep zooming in and out so you can kind of see the information that you're doing, and you're not kind of confusing the eye with too much stuff, and you get a good kind of sense of what's what. Already having that kind of skin in there is making a huge difference in terms of how that is looking. Now, I do need to do something really quickly, and I need to change the color of the glove because, again, that hand being the same color as the rest of the suit, as you can see, is making it kind of hard to understand. If you kind of look at this and you blur your eyes, which is something that you could really kind of need to do quite frequently when you're looking at something like this, is you can see that that's not really kind of working in that way. So I'm going to go in and on my details layer here, I'm going to pick, let's go in and pick that same purple that we're doing everywhere on the jacket and see how that kind of turns out. There we go. So it's not too bad, but this is where I might deviate from my original plan. Then this is where I'm going to go and select that kind of color again. Because I've got the marching ants of the selection, it can get in the way of kind of seeing the colors kind of interacting side by side because we've got this white and black line. So I'm going to do Command H and it's going to hide my selection. As you can see, it's still active, it's still there, but it's just hidden. I'm not getting that thing there. And I'm going to go in and press Command or Option Control and U, and it's going to bring up this hue saturation panel. So what I'm doing here is I'm deciding, all right, I need to make a visual difference in between the hand and the arm and rest of the sleeve so that that communicates quite clearly. And so I'm going to maybe just lighten or darken or kind of tweak just enough that it's like still matching my 60-30-10 kind of overall rule. It's not a completely different, crazy, wacky color like, you know, like I'm going to do this like vibrant green or something, and that just like throws everything off because now that's the first thing that you look at. But just keeping it in the same kind of realm of colors, but just making it enough of a point of difference so that we can kind of see that these two things are not the same. They're not attached. That's a hand, that's an arm. And that's probably just enough for what we need with this. And I'm probably going to do the same with the pants here and try and get something happening that can show us a little bit of a difference in there. And I've already got this red, so I might actually just go in and do that way. So here we go. I'm going to fill in these pants in red. And if I'm smart about this, I'll put my layer underneath the details layer. And I'll do that in a sec. And you'll see why that's going to be handy. I'm going to fill that with my red. And as you can see, all my belt and everything. But if I just pop that underneath my layer here, I, again, don't need to kind of make that difference. So again, it's just about like saving yourself time on that work to just get something that's easier to manage. So that's all looking a little bit better already with the pants being a slightly different color. Again, you know, we can go in and kind of tweak that a little bit as per need. We can go a little bit crazier if we want to go into the pinks. I quite like that kind of darkish red. It's still kind of there, but it's still on the kind of orangey red side, but there's a little bit of a differentiation in between the two. And while I'm at it, I might also make the staff that he's holding that same kind of color. That is actually kind of a little bit more aligned with the colors of Goku's like original staff. If you remember, not in Dragon Ball Z, but in the original Dragon Ball series, he's got a staff that he can kind of wield and that extends. And so having that be red kind of makes sense this way as well. Now I'm not feeling the shoes in that color. The kind of the weird kind of bandages / socks or leggings around that are fine. But I want to get a little bit more of a highlight on the shoes, make them kind of cool, kind of like almost like high tops. So I'm going to go with this blue. And I'm going to, I might make a new layer. Do I need to make a new layer? Do I not? I don't know. I did one for the pants. I'm not going to do one for the shoes. My decision is final. Okay. And what's happening here? I do need to make a new layer for the shoes because I have put the pants underneath the details. So there we go. That's a sentence you don't hear every day. I put my pants on underneath the details. So again, zoom out, see how that's looking. Just a little bit of that kind of what I like to kind of refer to it as like that 10% in our 60-30-10. It's like the mustard. It's like the chili sauce, or it's like the thing that you only put on a little bit of that picks up the entire thing. So we've got like main flavors, and then we put a sauce on, and it's just like bang, it's extra thing that comes on that makes it a little bit more interesting. So immediately that kind of takes on a much more kind of interesting look, a little bit more variety, something kind of out of left field, not in those warm tones, matches the kind of the blue of the hair a little bit. So that's good. And we're gonna name this as well, just because we're starting to have a few layers happening. So important to name them. And I'm going to put some white in there just to kind of get that like Air Jordan / kind of like Air Force One vibe. But little kind of tip for you, just like you should try, unless you're doing outlines, try and avoid using just black. Always go for, like, if you're going to use a really kind of dark color, try and use like even just like a super, super, super dark color version, right? Not just black. Probably nobody will really notice, but it just means that it's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more kind of color real. And same thing goes with our white here. Like coming in with a white on this is really going to stand out probably a bit too much, because we're doing kind of a slightly darker tone. And so having that white really is just going to kind of like poke you in the eye a little bit. So what I like to do is just make it a little bit more natural and go into our kind of yellows, oranges, make it a bit warmer and just ever so slightly off white. You can see here there's a very tiny little difference in between those two. And on my drawing, it will still look 100% like it's white, but it's just a little bit kind of watered down, if you will. It just means that we've got something a little bit less kind of bright, and it feels a little bit more natural. It's one of those kind of standard classical painting tricks from the Impressionists, where we're not getting, pure colors, because all light is a specific color. And so we're getting an impression of that. So just getting that little trick in here to get that look really immediately kind of makes a big difference to our drawing. I'm just getting a little bit of a trim of detail in the shoes here. There we go. And here. Oh, interesting question. Who is your favorite, Goku versus Vegeta? Oh, it's a tough one. You know what? Even though he's kind of like the baddie, and obviously he's not as like strong or powerful as Goku, I think I'd have to go with Vegeta, mostly just because I think he's like the Batman of the kind of the Dragon Ball world, where it's like he's a bit tortured, he wants to be good, and he ends up being good, but he's just a little bit more nuanced. And so yeah, I'd probably have to go with Vegeta for that. I know that's a bit maybe controversial, but Gohan was the correct answer. Nah, Gohan's a bit of a sook. I think he's a bit of a, like, obviously he's like superpower, but just like, yeah, I don't know. He's not the OG. I think Vegeta is the OG. That's my take on it anyways. Yeah, so what else can we kind of start thinking about in here? We can probably start thinking about a little bit of detailing on like the trim of the jacket, for instance. So let's go with this red. And because I reckon that red's probably not going to cut it, I'm just going to brighten that up because it's going to be a little bit too similar to our pants maybe. So we're going with this kind of like red on kind of like the collar and these kind of stripes on the jacket. And the cuffs of the jacket as well need to be that color. There we go. Bulma, yes, of course. Bulma is probably the more accurate answer to that question for sure. But man gave me the options of those two, so I went with those two. So blame Flynn. That's what I'm saying. Here we are. I should also change the color of his tail to kind of brown color. So we're not going to go yellow here because it's not his skin. Only the tail is that kind of like, go with a brown in here. So there we go. What else do we need in here? Probably need to give him eyes and some teeth. So eyeballs, teeth, mouth. And now we can start thinking about getting little bits and pieces of detail in here. So like the badges and things on his jacket, the rest of the belt or the packaging on there. And this is where we can start to think about like, almost like, I guess, extra colors that don't necessarily fit in our original kind of scheme, but are just going to be kind of little bits of detail that aren't going to consume our entire drawing, but still kind of create a sense of a bit of variety, because we don't want everything to be exactly the same. We want to get a little bit of kind of variety in there. So let's go in with that kind of variety and get in like maybe a green in here on a little piece of the jacket. Get some pink. Always pink. Pink is amazing. Pink is good. Always have more pink. Get some on the shoes there. Maybe some detailing on here. Avoiding copyright issues. Only 2 stripes and not a swoosh. Where to go. So again, it's just about little kind of points of color happening, and that didn't work out as much as well as I thought it would. Get that little kind of pouch on there. Maybe that can go here. These 2 guys maybe can do this. Again, this is where it's like, you know, now I'm just messing around because I'm completely kind of breaking the color scheme that I've worked to at this stage. But again, it's just on little bits and pieces of detail. So it's not like, these aren't the things that your eye is going to see from a distance too much. From a distance, we're still really looking at, you know, getting something that's going to look right. It's going to work well, and it's going to have a good amount of difference in terms of like what's what. I can almost sense that maybe my glove here is not the right color, and maybe that glove needs to be oops, and I've done a lot of stuff on my skin layer because I wasn't careful of what layer I was on when I was doing my work, and I've gone in and messed it up. Oh well. Let's say that our glove is going to be the same color as the hair, and see how that kind of works. A little bit funny because again, that information for your eye is kind of tricky to make the difference. Like what's the hand, what's the hair? So maybe we need to kind of differentiate that a little bit more, maybe brighten it up, liven it up a little bit, like so. That's probably good. And then we probably need to do the same over here, even though we haven't done any outlines for it. That's no big deal. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm kind of liking how all that's kind of looking. We might leave it there because kind of next phases is going to be to look at how this all works in color. But before I do, I just want to show you a last kind of little thing that I like to do at this stage when I'm kind of like, all right, this is looking good. I'm liking the colors. I'm liking how all this is working. Let's see very quickly what happens if I take it down a different path. So on my entire kind of color layer here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to kind of apply an effect to this, and I'm going to go to gradient map. And this is also going to allow me to quickly see what my values are on this drawing, like whether or not those values are clear, whether I need a little bit more light and dark. There's a lot of dark colors in here, so I'm probably going to need to tweak that in a little bit, just because it's looking a little bit kind of the volume is lacking. But what you can see here is what it will do is it will apply all of my colors as if it was a grayscale, but in this kind of mapped way. So if I do this, for instance, you'll see that the entire kind of thing goes to these pink to blue tones. So everything is in that range of colors. I also need to make sure that I'm only doing that to my layer, not the background. So I'm going to click on this one, and that's going to clip it to the layer underneath. And then I'm just literally just going to mess around with different kind of looks here and see what I'm kind of getting at. And again, I'm getting this feeling that's okay, yeah, the sleeves and the pants need to be different values here because it's not really working out the way that it should. That's not too bad. Again, just really like messing around with different things. That's pretty good. I don't mind that. But it's just a quick way of going like, let's flip the color scheme completely on its head here. This is obviously no longer have anything to do with Goku in terms of colors, but something that I like to do. I've made most of these color schemes myself just to kind of mess around. And a lot of them are a little bit kind of wacky and have that kind of neon vibe, as you can see. That's just kind of how I like to work. But it's just a really nice, quick and easy way to kind of see what could have been. And so that's basically it. And so what I'll show you now is what I've actually done in the week in between our two streams. And so this is the kind of the fully finished version of that particular character, right? So we're still working with these tones. I've kind of flipped a few things around. I've added some detail in the pants here. I've added this kind of like cloud pattern. And that has been done from this kind of reference that I got online. So again, using reference to kind of see how that works, just to get this nice kind of cool martial arts pants, give it a little bit more flair and detail. Added a little bit more detail on his pole arm here, colored in the bandage on the pants, but overall, still relatively similar color scheme to what we've been kind of working on, just with a few tweaks here and there just to reset the tones a little bit. And you can see here that where my pants and my jacket are the same kind of tone as you saw when I went black and white. Here, it's not so much the case anymore. And here I've got a much better understanding of, if I kind of flick that on and go to my black and white, well, you're not going black and white here. Let's undo that, delete, go back into that. and go black and white, please. Yes, there we go. I've got a little bit more variety in there. There's a little bit more volume and clear difference in between the pants and the top here. And that's what you want. That's what you want for a nice kind of balanced and contrasty character. So thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Just a little bit of a kind of an overview of how I like to work with color. A few little kind of tips and tricks in terms of how to use color. Next week, we're going to be looking at shading, adding some highlights, and doing some finishing touches as well, some little bits of kind of like flair and graphics just to make this kind of cool and usable on, like, I don't know, like a mouse pad or a t-shirt or something, or stickers. So yeah, hopefully you guys tune in on that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your questions. And that's it for now. Take care. We'll see you next week.